Hogsty presents It's Just Business with Steve Thomas and Rich Rogers. And now, here's your host, Chris Larry.
Hello and welcome to the Hogsty Network presents It's Just Business, where the three of us talk about the dollars and the cents, the money shaker, the media, the business that is the sports empires that we love and love to follow. I am joined, as always, by my friends Rich and Steve, and I am Chris Larry. How you doing, y'all?
I am doing wonderful.
Hey guys, I'm good.
Yeah, I'm doing okay. You know, since the last show, I've been up to Seattle and back. I did an episode of the Hogsty on our Hogsty West Coast offices, so that was interesting. But I'm back here in good old Texas, recording the show for y'all. So I'm very excited. I like shows where we have a bunch of other things that aren't necessarily football, and that's what we've got for you today.
And I'm happy that football has actually started with OTAs and other interesting things that I'm sure we'll get to. So I'm ready. Let's go.
Yeah, that's what the OTA is a whole nother
right.
show, of course.
Yes.
You can get a little bit more excited for OTAs than I do.
OTAs are awesome, man. I love the OTAs.
It's football.
It's
football.
It's football. They're out there hitting. There's not, that's the best time of the year. Everybody has hope. Even fans of the Cleveland Browns have hope this time of year, and that's a rare thing because their hopes are dashed, faster than Redskins fans' hopes are dashed. So that's a good thing.
No one has hopes when they're in shorts. All right, let's jump into. We're going to leave the world of football behind us and actually jump into the international intrigue of the Olympics. We should cue the theme, so I know we don't have it handy, but you can all imagine it in your head as it plays as we introduce this topic. So it looks like while the Rio Olympics, the Summer Olympics last summer, went off fairly well, especially compared to how people thought they were going to go. Some recent reports and actually some, I think, federal lawsuits within Brazil are painting a pretty bleak story about what was left behind in the Summer Games wreckage. Steve, you want to catch us up to that? Then maybe we
Sure.
can talk a little bit about some of these issues, because this really is stadium deals run amok at global
Yeah,
scale.
well, and it's also Olympic corruption run amok at a global scale, too, because this is really the second games in a row that this has happened to, because the Sochi Winter Olympics and Sochi, Russia had the exact same problems. But the story that came out this week was in Sports Illustrated. It's called Scathing Report on Rio Olympics Venues White Elephants. And the gist of it here, well, let me back up. Before the Summer Olympics started, we all heard things like, there was contamination in the water. People were going to die, if they swam in the water. The facilities were terrible. We heard all these things, and there were major protests in Brazil. There were a ton of other real world issues that had nothing to do with the Olympics that they were dealing with. But from a television broadcast standpoint, it looked fine to me. We didn't see any problems with the venues. Well, now we're a year out from that, maybe not quite a year. And the word here in the SI article today is that the facilities are already a wasteland. None of the improvements that were supposed to be done along with the Olympic Games were done. A lot of the creditors haven't been paid. There's $30 million in outstanding loans that were overdue that haven't been paid back. Even the medals are rusting. It says that 137 medals awarded during the games were rusted, needed to be repaired, most of which went to Americans. So, fancy that. And so, it's not surprising. But there's two issues. Is number one, Rio really hasn't done anything that they were supposed to do to improve the city of Rio de Janeiro after the Olympics. And two, the larger issue to me is that I'd like to discuss with you guys is why does the Olympic Committee keep awarding Olympic Games to these cities and these countries that can't afford it? Whereas the United States has been passed up in every Olympics since '96, and it's going to go on for another 20 years with the Olympics that they've already awarded. I don't understand what's going through the Olympic Committee's heads. So what do y'all think?
Well, so a couple of things on that. One, I actually happened when the Olympics were in Atlanta in 2000. I actually had an opportunity to visit the Olympic Village. I'm sorry, the Olympics were in Atlanta in
90s.
96,
Right, 96.
And I actually happened to visit the village that was vacated after the Olympics. And it actually was turned into a housing facility for the residents of Atlanta. And it was actually a really decent facility, low income housing, and people were actually able to have decent places to live after the Olympics left. So that operated the way it was supposed to. I don't know. I think it's a money grab, and who gets the money is the question. Is it the government? As you mentioned, Steve, creditors haven't been paid, so clearly they aren't getting the money.
Well, first of all, like in the case of the Sochi Winter Olympic Games 4 years ago, or when was Sochi? Is 2014, right? Yeah, in that case, it was corruption run amok. It was government contractors, getting contracts from the Russian government, that were, basically crime syndicates. They didn't do anything right. In Rio, I think it was less of a, sort of corrupt criminal enterprise and more that they just they didn't have the financial and logistical capability to do the games in the manner that they were supposed to do. And the result of that is exactly what you said. The facilities didn't come out right. I'm sure whatever grand plans they had for the use of these facilities, such as Atlanta afterwards, because Atlanta Olympic Park is, they're still, the Olympic Village is gone, but that whole Centennial Park area in Atlanta is still there, and that was a result of the Olympics. None of that is the case in Rio, and I think that's a pattern with these Olympic cities. If you look back at Seoul, Korea, it's all a wasteland. After the Seoul Olympic Games, Sochi's a wasteland, Rio's a wasteland. And so it's like if you put the games in, I don't know, Chicago, the United States would make sure it comes out right. There's no question that it would come out if it was in a major city like that.
There's only two cities that have ever turned a profit hosting the Olympics, and those are Los Angeles and Barcelona. And main reasons why was that they actually had the athletic and city infrastructures in which to not have to build or create large swaths of what that was. Everything from mass transit to actually a distributed network of venues and schools and places to actually do the competitions. What I've actually been, I totally agree that this is not working. I think you could go corruption, which I definitely agree with. You could also say, if you want to take a little bit more of a Pollyanna positive approach, you could say that the Olympic Committee has made more of an attempt to not have them in Western cities, although maybe to their own peril. But what I actually think is fascinating is that this is forcing some really interesting questions about actually just, maybe we should just blow this up. And I discovered a great theory, actually, that Wired Magazine talked about. This guy, a professor of economics at Smith College, is by the name of Andrew Zimbalist, Professor Andrew Zimbalist, wrote a book called Circus Maximus, and he suggested that because of our fractured digital age and because of the way we consume sports, we should just bite the bullet and do it distributed. And every time there's an Olympics, you just spread the competitions across the globe. Then you could imagine Rio would crush beach volleyball, right? While someplace with a high-end swimming venue that didn't have to get built from scratch could host swimming.
It's a digital age.
And he really had this fascinating theory.
It's an interesting digital age theory, but that it kind of eliminates the magic of what the Olympic Games is supposed to be. All countries coming together, put politics and religion and gender and all those other things aside and come together in the spirit of natural competition. And if you do it that way, that is kind of eliminated. To me, you bring up a really interesting point about the cities that turn to profit. I think the only way to really do it is exactly what you said. If these countries and these cities have to build stadiums and arenas and all these other things, there's no way they can make money. There's no way they can afford to do it There's most countries, the United States would have, problems raising that kind of money in any sort of reasonable manner if they had to build all these things from scratch. And that's exactly what happened in Rio. That's exactly what happened in Sochi. So I think what needs to happen is there needs to be an injection of realism into this process and say, you know what, we can't have an Olympics in the middle of nowhere in Russia. It's just not going to work. Where you need to have Winter Games is like in Denver, where the ski resorts are there, the hotels are there. I think what I like to get you guys' opinion on, I think it's part of the problem lies in the International Olympic Committee itself. Maybe this is just my jingostic American, pro-American in me coming out, but I've always thought the Olympic Committee sort of has it out for the United States. Like we had if I'm wrong, I don't think I'm wrong in saying that President Bill Clinton, led the American delegation in this last round of Olympic city selection, a few years ago. And and I'm no fan of Bill Clinton, but he's an American president and put his credibility on the line. They just ignored him. I think the Olympic Committee, to put it bluntly, sort of has it out for the United States, and that's caused some of the problems. Am I wrong?
Well, it could be. I don't know. I just, going back to a point that you mentioned before about having the infrastructure already in place, there was this big issue with Rio with actually getting the waters clean enough to have the events. And, there were body parts washing up on the shores of the beaches. The water wasn't even healthy enough to hold triathlons in Rio. So when you have to get the water clean enough to even have the events, I think that furthers your point that they're just not ready to host the events. And to Chris's point, there may be something to that in hosting events in different places throughout the world. Maybe not throughout the world, but maybe throughout a particular continent. For example, if you did the Winter Olympics in the United States or in Canada, you could spread those events out in cities across those different countries. You could have an event in Colorado, you can have an event in Utah, you can have an event in Maine. So there could be something to that.
They kind of do that to a certain extent already, a little bit. Like for example, I remember the soccer venue. Some of the soccer venues in Rio were way out in the middle of the jungle, in the middle of absolute nowhere. And they made an issue of how far out in the middle of nowhere and how hot and humid it was, 'cause it was literally in the middle of the jungle. And so I think it's a misnomer for people to think these Olympic Games were just in Rio. Rio is just the host city, but it was really sort of all over Brazil. And I think what you're talking about is spreading out even farther. You could have them, something in, Toronto and something in Vancouver, or what have you, or, have one event in Denver and have another event at Lake Tahoe, Squaw Valley, where the Olympics were in 76 or whatever. I just, it's possible. I don't like it because I don't like change. And, the let's not change anything guy in me says, I like the idea of having a host city. It's the Los Angeles Games. Everybody come to LA or London or Sydney, Australia, and celebrate, the diversity of the world for 3 weeks. That's what I like about it.
I like those things too. I would just suggest that, sometimes you have to break it to fix it, and you could still have host city bidding. You could still have opening and closing ceremonies. You could still do they get a set of marquee events, track and field, etc., which is usually done in the same venue as the opening ceremony and is actually in the second week. So I think there's some ways that I at least like what I liked about this article, and it came out with some other kind of left field and half baked ideas, but it's gonna take that kind of innovative thinking, I think, to pull this out of the.
Well, the other way is
because an international body is not going to reform enough.
Well, you're right. And the international body is not going to reform enough. And if you pay attention to the bidding process, they're literally getting bribed. I mean, it's just there's flat out bribery going on. And of course, the United States won't do that, and hence the reason why we lose some of these things. But the other answer again is just to stop picking, the Rio de Janeiros of the world and start picking the Chicagos of the world. You know, those are Chicago, L.A., New York City, London, Paris. You know, maybe Berlin. You know, some of these bigger cities, Sydney, the bigger, more developed first world cities can do it without having to spend billions upon billions of dollars building every new facility. You know, that's the other way to fix it. Is just stop going to these bad places.
Yeah, I mean, maybe, I don't know, maybe it's our Western arrogance, as some folks say, to think that that only an Olympics can be pulled off in a Western-ish society. So, um, I don't know. It's something to explore. I mean, if you had it in Chicago, would more creditors be paid? Were there creditors not paid in Atlanta? Were there creditors not paid in
Well, we didn't have to.
in
We didn't
LA?
have to spend all that money, though, Rich. I mean, that's the thing. I
Right,
mean,
right.
Chicago, you'd probably have it in Soldier Field. That would be where I'm just off the top of my head. In L.A., it'd be the L.A. Coliseum. You know, you wouldn't have to spend billions upon billions of dollars to create a mass transit system. You know, which is what they have to do in these cities.
Can I tell you?
Yeah,
Can I tell you a quick story, a quick true story, real
sure.
quick about the Olympic Village in Atlanta? So, as you may know, I'm a career educator, and I was an assistant principal at the time, and we went on a visit to Atlanta in 2001. It was right after 9/11, and we visited the Olympic Village, which was turned into housing projects for the residents of Atlanta. And they, once the Olympics were over, people moved into the village, but there was a very strict contractual agreement that if you lived in those facilities, there was a curfew. You had People had to be actively searching for jobs. You could not just be at home. There was and I thought that was very interesting. And they actually had people that would police it. So it wasn't just the Olympics are over, people can just come and live in that Olympic Village. You could just there was some level of accountability. So there was some social commentary for that, which is another topic. But I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, basically,
So
public housing with more strict rules, essentially.
Yes, absolutely.
that would be a rich political debate if about.
Perhaps another podcast.
I think I know what's.
Yes.
Yes, I would. I'll leave us with one interesting fact that I ran across doing a little bit of research on this story. They estimate that to pull off the Olympics, it costs anywhere from $10 to $20 billion. That's billion with a B, and that the average generated revenue off that is between 4 and 5 billion. So you can see the return on spend is poor. All right, maybe something that may do a little bit better for all involved, and that is the new Nike shoe deal by our friend and foe Odell Beckham Jr.
Emphasis on foe.
5 years, 25 million. Does that sound right?
Emphasis on foe. The reason why I thought the reason why I thought this story was interesting is that it's the dynamics of NFL shoe deals versus NBA shoe deals, and even MLB to a certain extent. This deal with Odell Beckham is with Nike, 5 years, 25 million, as you said. This is the largest shoe deal for an NFL player currently in existence. Now, 5 years, $25 million is chump change for deals for big name NBA players. Just as an example, LeBron James, who's certainly the biggest star in the NBA right now, or at least one of them, we can debate that another day. He's not my favorite. He has signed a lifetime deal with Nike. Lifetime, that could be worth, there's incentives and everything, could be worth up to $1 billion, billion with a B, over his lifetime. And Odell's got this 5 year, $25 million deal. And I would question how many other deals even exist for NFL players. It's weird to me that the NFL is the most popular sport financially in the United States by far, and these athletes just don't even come close to what NBA players get. And the dynamics of why is what interests me.
I have what could be an easy answer
Well,
to
good.
that question. Nobody outside of the playing field who wears cleats on the street. You know, you have a little bit more creativity and flexibility on, in the city or whatever, wherever. I mean, you don't see. Odell Beckham wears cleats. He wears a specialized shoe, as opposed to LeBron James and other NBA stars wear shoes that you can wear anywhere.
Well, yeah, I think that's a big part of it. And I think there's another aspect to it as well, which is that NBA players and baseball players, the fans on TV see their face up close. You kind of get to know them a little bit because, if you watch, I don't know, Steph Curry and, play with the Warriors, you see him up close on TV every night. Odell Beckham, all you see is a helmet. And Odell is out there a little bit more, than others. But I pick your biggest star on the Redskin, who would, I guess, it'd probably be Josh Norman, right? You see Josh Norman in a helmet. I think your average fan of, I don't know, the Atlanta Falcons might not even recognize Josh Norman if they saw him walking down the street. So I think that's part of it too. It's interesting to me that the most profitable league by far in the country, the players get paid the least amount of money, have the least guaranteed dollars, and have the least amount of endorsements.
And not to mention
Right.
the most physical abuse.
And the most serious abuse, or the most serious damage to their bodies of any sport by far.
That's a great topic for another show in terms of the money, just the way the money, the whole of the four major sports, of how the money is allocated. It is.
Well, I
something
think
to
one could
discuss.
argue that the reason why the NFL is so profitable is because they're not spending all the money on players. Whereas Major League Baseball long ago sent that ship up the river. They're never going to get that back.
A slightly different take on this same topic is, it is pretty interesting why OBJ here. And I think it really comes down to two reasons. The NFL and Nike, well, Nike especially, is really saying this is youth culture's bridge, is a player, and specifically Beckham Jr. here, in terms of a youth culture, someone who actually has penetrated the helmet. And you think about the hair and the antics. Think about how many times he's actually taking off his helmet on the sidelines and whatnot, sometimes to comic relief. But he knows this, and it's actually a player that younger fans identify with. And then he did a very smart thing in actually wearing, I know, just in warm-ups and all that, NFL, uniform Nazi stuff. But he had a different pair of unique custom tennis shoes for every game last season. So he did some really smart marketing to set himself up for this kind of deal, which is still twice as big as any
Well,
NFL
honestly,
player's shoe
the
deal.
other thing about it is the hair. I think his hair looks absolutely ridiculous with the frosted tips and all that, but it's very distinctive. It's very unique. Everybody instantly, Rich is laughing. Maybe we'll see Rich come on the show one day with frosted tips on his hair.
No. It's yeah. No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's you're right. I mean, he's marketed himself in a way that appeal in his antics on the field. A lot of young fans love him. He's got a lot of kids who are fans of him, and he stood out in a way that football players just typically don't. Hence the deal.
It's brilliant in that you're looking at what do young people identify with, and you're 100% right. Without the helmet on, everyone can relate to Odell Beckham Jr. and the hair. The hair is a moniker, but what makes him different from any other? I mean, look at other athletes. There's some in football, you market yourself with a thing. Cam Newton had a thing. He had a dab. He marketed that. Now, he didn't follow up that season with a great season, but everybody remembers him for dabbing. And what do kids do? even not just kids, not it's not a race thing. People dab because it's something that he did. So in the NFL, it's important to have a thing. Josh Norman tries to have his bow and arrow thing, but they stopped that. But that's a whole nother topic. We'll get to that later. But in the NFL, you have to have a thing. Victor Cruz,
the dance.
What do people know him for?
Yeah.
Salsa dancing. So you're right. When you have a helmet on and you have pads and people don't recognize your face, they recognize.
Yeah, it's a very good point. In you brought up the Cam Newton thing. It's the from what I understand, the dab started with a hip hop song. And it was done in a dirty South, hip hop rap song, but that transcended race, it transcended culture, it transcended everything. There were the most Bubba country types in the world doing that dab thing, and it was all because of Cam Newton and Cam Newton's thing. It's very good. That's a good point. And whose face do you see on commercials more than any other in terms of NFL players nowadays? It's Cam, I think.
When you have here's the key to money. When you have a thing plus success equals.
I love
money.
that. I think that's.
Cam Newton had his thing, and they went to the Super Bowl that year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so he had his dab plus the Super Bowl was his thing. Odell Beckham Jr. They don't quite have all the success in terms of team success, but they're not bad. So they have a thing plus winning. Josh Norman has had a thing in Carolina and they were winning. With the Washington Redskins, not so much. So a thing plus winning and you are a star.
Yeah, I mean, heck, even Odell's kicking net thing became a sensation for a while. I mean, yeah, we had the kicking net on the Hog's Thigh, as a matter of fact. We interviewed him, I think, 2 weeks in a row, as a matter of fact, if I recall.
Right. What about Aaron Rodgers?
And the discount
double.
the discount.
It's discount double.
I mean, it's
check.
another thing. Yeah, you're right. It's a thing. That's a good point. If you
That's
in the
his
NFL, so I guess you can summarize this by saying in the NFL, you have to have a thing and you have to have success. Whereas in the NBA, you just have to have success. Like Steph Curry is a boring guy, right? He's not going to be controversial. He doesn't wear out, like Russell Westbrook outlandish styles. He just kind of is who he is, but he's immensely popular because he has success. In the NFL,
Yes.
success alone does not equal marketing dollars. You have to have something else.
Well, these guys know they have to transcend the helmet, right? Like, I
Yes.
think that's a really key point. They know they got to penetrate outside the helmet if they want to, earn money past football or during football, or to join the culture past the nature of the team game that's played inside a helmet.
You're not going
to.
to.
Yeah. That's a
Go
great
ahead.
point.
Sorry.
That's a great point in that, and then sometimes you can be so good where you don't need a thing. Case in point, look at Randy Moss. Randy Moss is probably one of the best receivers in the history of the NFL. Maybe he did have a thing. His thing was being what I would say is a jerk to the media. And then he turned around and got a job in the media like right away. So sometimes your thing is not always.
Yeah, well, and Randy's actually a pretty smart guy when it comes to NFL analysis too. Ironically, he's pretty good at it. But see, Randy's thing didn't translate to marketing dollars. Randy had like zero marketing dollars. Nobody's going to convince me unless I hear it from Odell himself that Odell's frosted hair isn't just a brilliant marketing gimmick. I'm convinced that that's part of it. You just have to have that. I mean, heck, look at our show. Our show's favorite topic. LeVar Ball. I mean, Lonzo Ball's proposed shoe deal was like 4 years, $10 million. That was about the range he was going to get from Nike, and that's before he's done nothing. All he did is play 1 year in college. He was going to get 4 years, $10 million. No NFL player anywhere. Myles Garrett, number 1 overall pick, was not going to get any kind of deal like that from anybody. Robert Griffin did, but Robert Griffin had an enormous amount of charisma that was very, very unusual. And I think that's what kind of propelled him to the dollars he got until he got hurt and failed out of the league.
But Steve, you make it's a good point in that NBA. It's not about setting yourself up for after the NBA. I mean, you can make boatloads of money in the NBA and never have to work again. In the NFL, it's about setting yourself up for after football because you don't have the marketing. Some people don't have the marketing capability to make big money while they are playing. I mean, we could. This is a great topic for another show. Just think about how many people we don't hear about that. Let's think about how many people don't get cushy broadcasting gigs or on-air gigs. It's in the hundreds that don't make it. So they're setting themselves up for after football, as opposed to the NBA. One contract, one modest shoe deal, and you're set for life.
I mean, you can't argue with that. But, so I think to summarize this, because I think it's probably time to move on, to summarize this, it's interesting that Odell gets the largest shoe deal in the NFL ever, and it doesn't even compare remotely to the deals in basketball. There's a whole bunch of dynamics why, and I think you can, at the end of the day, it's really the transcend the helmet. That was a good line, Chris. It was transcend the helmet. And that's Odell and Aaron Rodgers, and Cam Newton are about the only three that have done it that are current active players.
So actually that takes us into our next topic pretty fluidly, in that recently the NFL has started to put in a number of rule changes. In fact, on the Hogstye last week, I think we talked about some of the changes to the overtime rules. So if you want to get our download there, go ahead and listen to that show. Little plug. But they also did a bunch of changes, or are considering a bunch of changes to the celebration rules. And why I think this is an interesting bridge from our last topic, because they're actually understanding that as their ratings go down and the marketability of their players, that they have to get out of the way of these players doing more to transcend the helmet. And the celebrations, which the NFL has no problem selling you all kinds of trinkets with the celebration moves, let alone the multi-million-dollar Madden industry, which has these guys dancing, like they were Michael Jackson and Bruno Mars, with no flags. So they know they've got to start taking the gloves off these players to bring ratings up, to keep the youth market, and to let these players start to earn more revenue. So do you think it's connected, the loosening up of the celebration rules, to NFL's paranoia about ratings and relevancy?
I think it has a direct correlation. Last year, somewhat infamously, the NFL ratings were down for the first time, significantly down for the first time in a long time. And one could argue that the presidential election had to do with that, But the bottom line is the NFL, even though they acted like they weren't worried, I think these changes are a direct result of their worry about the ratings. People, if you see Ezekiel Elliott jump into, what did he jump into? He jumped into there you go. Yeah, he jumped into a huge, Salvation Army bucket. Well, aside from the fact that we all hate Dallas on this show, that's fun to watch. It's entertaining. It's fun to watch. It got a lot of press. It's going to draw some people in. And I think the NFL, at the end of the day, the owners couldn't care less about sportsmanship or anything else. It's really, if it gets in the way of ratings. And so, they loosened up the celebration rules, not because they care that Vernon Davis got a $6,000 fine for shooting a basketball. It's because they want more ratings. I think it's a direct correlation.
I don't know. Does the NFL really think they're going to get more viewers because now they have allowed more celebrations? I think the NFL the NFL needs to concentrate on not losing more fans than gaining more. There are a lot of people out there that do not like football. And I don't know what the NFL can do to convert those fans, but I think part of it also is, if Vernon Davis gets flagged for shooting a basketball, like a 3-pointer, that's an issue for me because I see a flag and it affects my team, and it seemingly from a fan's perspective gives an unfair advantage to the other team because it's vague. But I think this is going to be fun. I think this was a good thing. I think the bigger issue that Roger Goodell that has been getting lauded for is that this was something he did in collaboration with the players, and I think that's the bigger story.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe you're right. I tend to think that the NFL wants to create moments, and if they allow more dancing and more celebration, it's going to create a moment. I don't think that they're under any illusion that, this year they're going to see a spike in ratings because they're going to let Vernon Davis shoot a basketball. But I think it's a slow build, right? If the game is more entertaining and they convince people the game is more entertaining, they may get more casual fans. Whereas if they have a reputation as being the no fun league, the casual sports fan or the not sports fan isn't going to tune in, or is less likely to tune in than they will if they see something they think is fun. I think that's kind of what it's about.
I also think they know that they see trend lines, right? They see a slight dip in the ratings. They see some other kind of metrics that are even a slight negative downturn has long-term impacts for them. And they see what is affecting that brand. And when you have effectively been called as one of the key nicknames, the No Fun League, going on 3 decades, that's a problem. Like the No Fun League. It says it all right there. And also with social media the way it is, every time some guy would get fined for a celebration dance or a big hit, and the NFL literally 2 or 3 days later is selling $250 glossies on NFL.com of said hit or said dance move, and Twitter's calling them out. That's a fun mid-NFL week story headline, is for the writers and the beat writers to start pointing out where the NFL's marketing their own
it's very
flagged plays. So I think those things matter.
Right?
Well, that's what I'm saying. So they have to turn that tide because they see it starting.
Well,
to
the other big
avalanche on
rule
them.
that came out this week, a rule change that came out this week, is that the owners, we talked about it last week, and the owners voted to reduce the overtime from 15 minutes to 10. I just can't imagine what benefit the owners think they're going to get out of that. How many games a year even go over past the 10-minute period in overtime, and then in those handful of games, how many injuries really are there? It's clearly an injury thing. It's clear that they want to pretend like they actually care about player safety, but how much safety are they really getting out of that? I don't understand it, except it's a sort of a general trend towards safety. They can point out it as a big picture thing. Look at all these things. We eliminated the kickoff, basically. We're going to limit overtime. We've done all these things. I think it's probably just part of a larger trend for the owners to pretend like they actually care about safety, which they don't.
Yeah, I don't. There was a discussion today on one of the local radio stations about the overtime period, and they were looking at the percent of actual scores and touchdowns that are made in the overtime period, and it was like less than 1%. Then the question is, why did they move away from sudden death? That might be something they may want to revisit.
I think the sudden death rules people just think are unfair more than anything. I think it's competitively not fair if one team just has no shot to win at all. I mean, that's that's a different issue. But look, the NFL is reactionary, just like any entertainment industry, because at the end of, really at its core, the NFL is an entertainment industry, and the entertainment industry is going to react to what they think the people want. And like Chris said, if the NFL has been the no fun league for 30 years, they want to do something to change that. And if that something is allowing Victor Cruz to dance more when he scores a touchdown, if he ever scores another touchdown, which he might not, they're willing to do it.
With the rollback of these rules and knowing that it was actually the Redskins that inspired this rule to begin with, and because it was really an attempt to break up the fun bunch, it was actually where the first iteration of the no end zone celebration rule was put into effect. The Redskins this year have got to do a fun bunch huddle slap five on the first wide receiver tight end touchdown of the year. It has to happen.
You know, and we've had on the Hogsty, we had an original member of the Fun Bunch as a guest, in Ricky Sanders. You know, and I can't remember what he said about how that Fun Bunch came about. I can't remember. I don't think he said they planned it. I think it sort of just happened because they were close friends, I think is what he said.
Was he still? Was the Fun Bunch still around? Did he overlap with the Fun Bunch? Because that goes all the
No,
way back
you
to
know
like
what? Yeah, you know, I'm
Virgil
getting it
Say
backwards.
and
There
those
was
guys.
there was the Smurfs and the Fun
Right.
Bunch. You're right. I'm getting it backwards. The Smurfs were the second group. The Fun Bunch was the first group. You know,
I think Art Monk might be the one that was. He was definitely in the Fun Bunch,
yeah.
but he was
well,
pretty
Monk
young.
was drafted in '81. We're gonna have to look that up before we get off the air because now it's gonna bug me. But point. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Well, I
Go
just
ahead,
think
Steve.
the
Go ahead,
point
Steve.
is exactly what I said. It's, you know, the NFL trying to reverse the no fun league thing for the purpose of driving ratings in sort of a macro sense. That's all I was trying to say.
I think that, and let me say this about, and I want to relate this to Cam Newton. I won't say loathe, but I can't stand Cam Newton. Not because he's not a good football player, but I just think his celebrations are absolutely over the top. And I know you can't have separate rules for separate people, but if you are losing and you are celebrating and you are taking selfies on the sidelines and you are running up and down the sidelines with your teammates, taking pictures on the sidelines, I think that is too far. So we'll see where this goes. To me, if you score a touchdown, then I'm a little bit more liberal, if you want to call it. But, you know, spinning the ball after a first down, after 3rd and 4, you caught a 3rd and 4 and you want to spin the ball, that should be a delay of game penalty. So I'm not completely, you know, all on board with this. To me, it's if you score a touchdown. Anything else should be, you know, is ridiculous.
You know, that's probably a good place to leave it. You know, it's the you know, that's why the NFL banned it in the first place. Banned these celebrations in the first place because it gets excessive and ridiculous. I mean, some of it's entertaining, some of it's just dumb. I don't have a problem personally with Cam Newton's stuff, but that's just me. You know, yeah, I mean,
I can't stand because he does it because he's a sore loser. It's one thing, you know, not to say you have to celebrate when you're losing, but you just he's just, to me, he's just a sore loser. Maybe that's just something I have personal with him. You know?
and
his pout
well,
is
that's
as big
true.
as his swag.
And for the record, the
Chris?
for the record, the Fun Bunch was in fact the group. It goes back to the early '80s. It was the Fun Bunch, not the Smurfs, that resulted in the excessive celebration penalty. So, Chris, you were right. It was the Fun Bunch, which was the first group.
That's right.
You know, Virgil Say and all those guys, Art Monk, and yeah. Yep.
It's got to happen. It's got to be first wide receiver or tight end touchdown. Fun Bunch. Come on, that's got to be the next Hogside Network campaign.
Yeah, well, let's get Jacoby
right.
in the Hall of Fame first. I'm going to worry about that, and then we'll worry about the Fun Bunch.
Yeah, Colt McCoy to Josh Dawson in some, but that's another topic.
That's not. It's too early.
Yeah.
It's too early. All right. One of the things we like to do on It's Just Business is follow some of the media and money stories because, you know, big sports business and media are deeply entwined. And, you know, this stretch of weeks saw another layoffs in a pretty large media entity in the sports landscape, and that is Sports Illustrated. Steve, you got the 411 on that?
Well, yeah, you know, the bottom line is Sports Illustrated laid off a bunch of guys, a bunch of people, a bunch of employees, and why did they do that? It's because Sports Illustrated fundamentally was a magazine, in its infancy, and magazines are on the way out. And there's a whole lot more media outlets out there nowadays where people can consume via the internet, where people can consume their sports news. And so, whereas I think even maybe 15 years ago, SI was maybe the preeminent sports media outlet, certainly for hardcore, in-depth stories. And nowadays, they're just another one. And so that results in a drop of market share in terms of sports, and the drop in market share in turn means less people, and that's what happened. It's sort of the same thing that's happening to. It's the same thing that's happening in the ESPN layoffs. So there you go.
The dead tree press is dying.
Listen, I've been a subscriber to Sports Illustrated for a long time. I like Sports Illustrated. I still read it. Maybe I'm yet another thing I am an anachronism on. I did see though, of course, that LeVar Ball came up in this story again. You all saw that. Chris pointed this out to us earlier. Lindsay Applebaum, of course, slammed LeVar Ball on the way out and saying, I don't have to give a damn about LeVar Ball now, which is funny, implying that SI had to care because he's a loud, obnoxious, personality, and now she didn't have to care.
I know this sounds a bit. This could be a little insensitive, but I don't get how sports networks are immune to layoffs just like any other line of work. I mean, I work in for the government, and they have layoffs all the time. So I mean, it's not good. It's just that I don't get the big, they're laying off all these people, but it happens everywhere. What's the big deal?
Well, people don't care about government employees. People aren't, and I said that, that may be true, but that may have sounded harsh. People are not entertained by government employees. People are entertained by Sports Illustrated and by ESPN, and they're in the public eye, because people are spending their dollars on it, whereas they're not spending dollars, their entertainment dollars on the school district. They're spending it on SI, and so from that respect, and these people are public figures in some cases, so it's much bigger news because they're public figures. But no, you're right. I mean,
I also think
sports media is not immune, just like no industry is immune.
And I think the more interesting storyline is actually, what is it a bellwether for, right? What is the industry change we can track from that? So, because ESPN's actually been hiring, fairly robustly over these last couple of weeks too, because it's not just about it. They're also having to transition. They're also having to think about where their investments and where their resources and where their business model is evolving. So sometimes it's also as much about seeing what the trend is for that industry rather than, oh, woe is me, it's laying off all these folks. The one caveat I'd say to that is I personally, and this is the news industry at large, and sports is not immune. I do worry when a lot of these cuts come in the editorial, they come in the writers, they come in the beat reporters, and more of that becomes corporate owned by the leagues, by the team. That's probably a bigger topic, but so the independent reporting, whereas where a lot of these cuts will often happen in the newsrooms per se, means where's that reporting going? Often, it's the Larry Michaelization of sports
media. It's going nowhere, is where it's going. Well, look, even like a decade ago, the whole Hogsty universe would not exist. A decade ago, there wouldn't have been a website and a podcast, in written word that, all of us that work on the Hogsty or a Hogs Haven or, any of these other, Burgundy blog, any of these other sites do. None of that existed in any substantial form a decade ago, and I think it definitely has cut away from the public's consumption of the major sports media outlets. Like I know I can. I haven't tracked this, but I'd be willing to bet I spend, outside of all the effort we all put into the Hogsty, I think I probably spend just as much of my excess sports time on independent media and blog sites as I do ESPN or Sports Illustrated. And I probably get just as good a content, quite frankly, in some of them. And so that just, it cuts away. It cuts away from, the domination that Sports Illustrated had of the sports market. It's just eroded. So there you go.
Tyranny of the amateurs.
Yes, that's exactly right. We are not reporters. Hashtag not a reporter. But yet we're doing it anyway.
We are ham radio from the 50s and 60s.
That's probably true. That's probably true.
That's good, right?
Yeah, I went old school on you.
Ham radio. My dad would be proud. He was a ham radio guy, Rich. Is.
All right. I think ham radio might be our signal that we need to wrap up this episode of It's Just Business. But as we've been liking to do the last couple of weeks, going to go around the horn here and just kind of give a quick peek at maybe a story that you're kind of looking down the road. We might be talking about more in depth coming up. I'll start it off here saying that, over the last few episodes of the podcast, we've sort of been looking at these non-traditional media outlets starting to broadcast sports or sports content. And I'm really intrigued about Facebook's Major League Baseball deal. I think they're going to do something like 25 games. I don't know exactly. Can get more information. But there's another social media, kind of Silicon Valley giant jumping into the live sports broadcasting. It's fascinating.
Yeah. From my perspective, I promise we're going to get to salary cap. We kind of tabled it for this week. We're going to get to that. And the other thing that interests me is the Super Bowls. There's been some chatter this week about reorganizing, the list of Super Bowl cities, and the whole Super Bowl industry is fascinating to me. So I want to get to that one of these days.
And speaking of, that's a good segue into, I'm sort of looking at something a little the Kirk Cousins contract negotiations, but from a different perspective. Everyone in the area is talking sign Kirk. But what ramifications will that have for signing a guy like Brandon Scherff or Jamison Crowder? So it seems as if fans in this area are looking almost at a blank check for Kirk. But what does that mean because it's all good until one of the guys that we love and one of the young guys that we drafted walks out the door.
It's certainly a big topic that we will address very soon, I suspect.
Hopefully, while we celebrate him signing a reasonable deal. Yeah, we will collectively hold our breath until that happens, and still ensure we'll be here for the next episode of It's Just Business, which will be coming at you. Make sure that you stay tuned and watch out for, of course, the Hogsty, the mothership. And is it the
All 32 still? It's hosted by Jamal and Montel and Ryan, and that will come out. That comes out alternating weeks from us. So this show comes out the week you're hearing it, and then all 32 will be the week after that.
Support the network, y'all. All right, Rich, where can they find you online?
I'm on Twitter at Disco Q.
And Steve, where can they not find you?
Please don't find me online. I'm not online. I'd prefer you not contact me online. Contact me at the Hogsty on Twitter and via our email, which is thehogsty@gmail.com.
All right, and you can find me at ChrisLarry33. Find me there. I'd love to go back and forth with you. Until the next time, good night, y'all. We look forward to talking to you again. Thanks for being with us.